All right, today we're jumping into what might be one of the most, personal, raw, and revealing letters ever written. We're talking about the Apostle Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. And let me tell you, this is not just some dry theological document. It's really a window, a look right into the heart of a leader who's dealing with crisis, criticism, and some pretty deep spiritual insights.
And really, the whole thing pivots on this one kind of wild question. Paul is about to flip everything we think we know about success, influence, power, completely on its head. He throws out this idea that just feels, totally backward. So, let's get into it.
Okay, first things first, we gotta get the context here. This letter, it wasn't written from some quiet, comfy study. No way. This thing was forged in the fire of conflict, betrayal, and finally, reconciliation. It's just this incredibly emotional, passionate response to a church Paul really loved, but a church that was in complete and utter turmoil.
So, what's the backstory? Let's break it down. Paul starts this church around AD 51, but, pretty much as soon as he leaves, these new teachers show up and start, trashing him, undermining his authority. And it gets so bad that he has to make what he calls a painful visit. After that, he sends a severe letter, which, by the way, we don't even have anymore. It's lost to history. So this letter, 2 Corinthians, is the follow-up. He's just heard that the church has, for the most part, come around. So the letter is this incredible mix of relief, but also him defending himself and just this deep, deep desire to patch things up. You're literally watching a relationship get mended in real time.
And this really gets to the core of the whole problem. Paul's critics, and he has this great sarcastic name for them, the super apostles, these guys were flashy. You know the type. They had perfect resumes, they were amazing public speakers, and they were all about worldly status and looking good. So they look at Paul, who's kind of unpolished, who talks openly about his suffering, and they're just like, yeah, no way. This guy can't really be an apostle. It was a total clash of values, right down to the bone.
So, how does Paul respond to all this? Does he try to compete? Puff up his own resume? Nope. He does something completely different. He introduces this radical idea, this huge paradox that just completely flips the script on what real power and authority are all about. And this is it. This is the core metaphor for the entire letter. Paul says we're like jars of clay. Think about that. Just common, cheap, easily breakable pots. But inside these ordinary pots, we're carrying something absolutely priceless, a treasure. And the whole point is to show that the real power, it doesn't come from the jar itself. It comes from the treasure inside the jar. So let's really break that down. The jars of clay, that's us. That's our humanity, with all our weaknesses, our limitations, our suffering, how fragile we are. But the treasure? Oh, that's something else entirely. That's God's power. It's the gospel. It's His Spirit living in us. And here's the kicker, the really crucial point. It's the cracks in the jar that actually let the light of the treasure shine through. You see? Our weakness doesn't disqualify us. It's the very thing that magnifies God's power.
So as you can imagine, this whole paradox has massive implications for what it means to be a leader. I mean, if true strength is really found in weakness, then our entire definition of a good leader just gets turned upside down. It's not about performance and polish anymore.
And just look at the difference here. It is so stark. On one side, you've got the super apostles' resume, right? Polished speeches, looking impressive, letters of recommendation, the whole shebang. And then you look at Paul's resume. What's on it? Imprisonments, beatings, shipwrecks, hunger. It's literally a list of his sufferings and all his weaknesses.
So Paul basically says, oh, you want me to boast? Fine, I'll boast. But he's being completely sarcastic, right? He starts bragging about the very things his opponents would call total failures. And you have to ask, why would he do that? Well, because every single one of those hardships was another chance for God's power and faithfulness to show up and be proven. His weakness became the stage for God's strength. And this whole idea really comes to a head in one of the most famous verses in the entire Bible. Paul gets really personal. He talks about this painful struggle he has, something he calls a thorn in the flesh. He says he begged God 3 times to take it away. And God's response? It wasn't, sure, I'll remove your weakness. It was, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That's it. That's the thesis statement for the whole book, right there.
But look, this isn't just some abstract idea to think about. Paul makes it super practical. He shows how this grace, working through our weakness, has a real, tangible effect on how we're supposed to live as a community. It changes everything, right down to what we do with our hands and our wallets.
And he puts their faith to the test with something really practical, a challenge. He asks them to take up a collection, a financial collection for the believers back in Jerusalem who were really suffering and impoverished. And you got to understand, this wasn't just about the money. It was a test of their transformation. Were their hearts really changed? Were they going to be generous?
So Paul lays out these really clear principles for what he calls grace-fueled generosity. And it's not at all about giving because you feel guilty or someone's pressuring you. He says, first, it has to be willing. It has to come from your heart, freely. Second, it has to be cheerful. You should give with joy, not with resentment. And third, it's got to be faith-filled. You give trusting that God's going to provide for you, even as you're providing for others.
And it all gets summed up in this simple phrase. It's all about the attitude of your heart, not how big the gift is. It's supposed to be this joyful, natural response to the incredible grace that you've already received.
All right, so as we start to wrap this up, let's just boil it all down. What are the core takeaways from this incredibly powerful, emotional, and, well, deeply human letter?
Okay, so here are the big ones. First, real strength. It's not found in hiding our weakness, but in admitting it. Second, suffering isn't just meaningless pain. It can actually be the very platform for God's power. Third, authentic leaders are humble servants, not slick performers. And finally, God's grace really does change everything, from transforming conflict into reconciliation to inspiring true generosity.
And so, the final question that 2 Corinthians leaves us with, it's a really personal one. It forces you to look at your own life, to look at the parts you see as limitations or failures or just plain weaknesses, and to ask yourself a tough question. What if that is the exact place where some unexpected, greater power is just waiting to be revealed?
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us.